Tarek, give me some good advice on managing permissions.
Okay. Put some kind of alerting on when somebody creates or gets access to critical privileged access.
Okay. So put an alert on anything that's critical access alerted. All right.
Yes.
Do the flip side for me, David. Give me some bad advice on managing permissions.
Well, since he went there, I'm going to have to say just give everybody, the critical access. Don't even control who.
All right. So open access for everybody. All right. Tarek, let me see if you can one up that. Give me some worse advice.
Do that, but using group nesting.
Hold it. What's group nesting going to do?
Ooh.
Well, basically, you're burying it really, really deep at that point.
So it's not going to be easy to find.
No.
All right. Awesome. Some really bad advice. One upped. All right. Let's begin the show.
Get ready. It's Super Cyber Friday.
Welcome to Super Cyber Friday. Today's topic is hacking bad permissions, an hour of critical thinking about the domino effect of unknown access settings. And I'm also going to make a big announcement today. This is our last time in version 1 of Crowdcast. We've held on to it because Crowdcast version 2 has got issues. Well, guess what? They're dropping version 1 and they're going to make us move over to version 2. So enjoy version 1 as long as you want. We'll be in version 2 next time, which got a lot of great new functionality, but we were having problems with it. But hopefully we won't anymore. All right. So our guest today, you just saw David Tyberski. He's the VP of Information Security and the CISO over at Wynn Resorts. And also Tarek Khaled, who is the founding sales engineer over at Veza. Guess what? Veza is our sponsor for today's episode. Thank you so much, Veza, for sponsoring today. Guess what? Lots of different ways to participate. Let me just go through the key ones you need to remember. Our bad idea is worst way to manage permissions. Be creative on this one. I want some good stuff. And remember, submit tips on how to improve permission management. Remember, if you come up with the best bad idea as determined after the show, you could win an awesome CISO Series fleece. You can also vote in the polls. Anyone can come on in video with a Bring Me On. Our producer, Aaron, will bring you on, ask a question, or vote for your favorite question. You see at the bottom of the screen, there's a chance to ask a question. All right. Our schedule, you saw it, good advice, bad advice, worse advice. We'll have our bad ideas. We'll have your 10% tips. We'll play the public interest. We'll put the polls up. We'll play the Department of Yes. We'll have questions, advice. And then at the very end of the show, we roll over to our meetup portion. For those of you who are on, who have never, ever attended that portion, I'm asking you, please come. It's a lot of fun. I guarantee you'll have a good time, and you'll meet someone very, very interesting. Next scheduled show is not going to be until after Black Hat, and that's going to be Hacking Conferences on August 18th. That'll be on version 2. An hour of critical thinking about shaking up an old format of in-person events. Of course, that's going to be a lot of fun. Guess what? There's a link at the bottom of the screen where you can register for that event and not be taken out of this event. So that link will be up there for almost the entire show. Go ahead and click on it at any time because remember, if you register early, you're automatically entered in a raffle to win a CISO Series jacket. Huge thanks to Faith Gambrill of Maryland Stadium Authority. She's this week's winner. They do exist. Winners do exist. All right, enough of that beginning. Let's begin this actual content and get your questions in too as well, everybody. All right, the first question I have here is, and by the way, if you watch the tease, you'll know the answer to this, but Tarek, I thought misconfigurations happen because of stupid mistakes, but Tarek, that is actually not the case. Why do misconfigurations of permissions happen?
Well, like I said, I mean, it's a combination of different things, right? It's a function of different systematic failures that happen along the way. Again, like this is the nature of shared services, which is part of the problem itself, right? But obviously, cloud services are here to stay, and shared services are here to stay. But the problem it presents is now you have multiple different teams, all of them that are managing configurations in different ways, different naming, different tagging, different type of security policies that they may be using, different tooling, right? Automation is another part of this, where you think you have it locked down, but ultimately you end up pushing something that is not least privileged and propagate that through automation. And now your blast radius, that configuration gets nested and becomes embedded and it becomes everywhere, right? So automation is another component of that. So And it's a number of additional things as well. Trying to
So
drive. Sorry,
you
go
have
ahead.
to go back the chain to see the problem. It's not
You
the
do.
thing that's on the face of it all, right?
You do, and honestly, the end of it, the end of the final product of a bad entitlement is ultimately somebody that got access that should not have had access, right? That's kind of like the basic simple fact of it. But again, like these things are accidents; they happen, and the reason why accidents happen is because you're not paying attention to the various components that are driving configuration changes, and it's impossible to do so at a way that's at least scalable, right? It takes an ungodly amount of time and effort and hours to go and do that, at least in a manual way. That's why you need to automate as much of it as possible. But in order to do that, you have to connect to these layers, to each and every one of those layers at a deep level, right? So, and that's not an easy task to do.
And Felipe Chila here in the chat said, with sufficiently complex systems, failure is inevitable. David, I'm sure you've seen that happen in your career, yes?
Yes, and I was actually going to type the response, but I'll say it is that in any sufficiently sophisticated system is indistinguishable from magic as well. Just remember
Yeah.
that. But yeah, I agree with Tarek on that. I mean, you have to understand where the failure is, but to the point, I think it still does go back to it's typically a simple mistake or a simple oversight that somebody says that's too hard to do, and so they choose not to somewhere back in the chain, and then that just cascades down the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
Or a group of people who say, I don't really want to manage that because that's not really my job, just leave it open.
Let me ask you a question. There's now right here, who is it? Jeff Reich, he part of his bad idea says remove any user that pisses you off. Is this a feature in Vesa, by the way? And if not, could you put it in the next version?
Possibly, I can put a mark on a user that pisses me off, and monitor them more effectively. You can absolutely kind of do that, right? If somebody is on a high offender list.
Wait, wait. That's an interesting thing. If there is a user who, it's not that they're they're being malicious, but they're sloppy with the way they behave. Is there ways that within your program that you allegedly can alert, like sort of like maybe watch this user a little bit more?
Yeah. And these are usually these types of users, and we see them all the time. They're basically people that have been in an organization for a long time. They've shifted their roles multiple times over and over, and they have a lot of long tenure in the organization, and that
carries over to their digital footprint. Yes,
absolutely. There's always a few of those, and whenever we plug in Vesa and surface these identities, it's kind of scary because what happens if that identity is compromised, right? And this person has God level access. So the idea is to monitor those identities more effectively and try to shrink down any of the access that they're not utilizing, right? So first, to do that, you have to have a full lay of the land and see exactly what the extent of that access is. And to do that manually is just no way, right?
By the way, get your questions in, everybody. I want to get your questions in and register for the next one that's happening on the 18th. So, David, I want to know, like, what does this mean to a security program? Because we talk about this endlessly on all our programs about user rights and access and managing it. But can you drill down like what the detailed problem was and how your overall security program changes as you're tackling this issue?
Well, I mean, the overall problem is over provisioning or extended provisioning past somebody's usable job life, meaning they've changed into another role. They maintain access from their previous roles, and that cascades as they move throughout the organization from an analyst to an engineer to manager to director or whatever. And then all of a sudden they've still got all this global permission, which is a security problem in and of itself. Mm-hmm. The idea around identity and permission management.
Let me pause you there at just one moment.
Okay.
I want to talk about the moment that their permissions change. So I have role X. I've just been promoted to role Z. What's happening in that moment of my permissions? Like, is there somebody who's manually changing my permissions at that time, and there's just not a case of looking backwards, or what's happening in that moment that essentially these problems sort of mount? It's the reason I'm pausing you.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, besides the fact that you skipped over role Y, you went from X to Z, but that depends. So in today's world, in SaaS application, cloud application, there's fair amounts of automation that can help you do that, but you have to design that in. In legacy applications, you may not even have directory integration or LDAP or any of some even 10-year-old technologies that allow you to manually do that. Provisioning in and of itself is a complex problem. I saw here in the chat somebody mentioned a single sign-on that as part of their idea structure, but nobody mentioned SCIM, which is basics on provisioning. You have just-in-time provisioning or just manual provisioning, and so your HR team moves you from one role to the other, but doesn't tell the access team to change permissions. So there's a communication problem there. Then the permissions don't get changed, and you're holding on to responsibilities because you're the SME. And so you're not giving it up to the next guy who's taking on that role because, my God, that might mean you can be replaced.
Yep.
Okay, so hold it, and let me just add, and then I want to hear Tarek, is that this is a monstrous process debacle, and then I can see why over provisioning happens, because someone just gets so frustrated and goes, fine, I'll just give you access to everything. I mean, I'm assuming that happens. All right, Tarek, I'm sorry to stop you. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I completely agree with what David said, but I'll take it a step further. I feel like it's on the actual, companies or organizations that are making purchasing decisions from vendors. For the same reasons that, single sign-on became a requirement. Tell me if your application supports single sign-on. Tell me if it supports standards like SCIM. I think we're forced to take it a step further and say, show me how you actually extract authorization via API from your applications, right? If this is buried deep and it's something that I can never get to, how can I actually do this programmatically? How can I hope to put better enforcements around it? So by pushing that back on the actual vendor and forcing them to kind of have better APIs in place that expose that, that magic that happens within their platform that determines how access is determined, it makes it a lot easier to put controls around that, right? So I feel like it has to become part of that checklist whenever we're assessing technologies to try to ask that question and come up with better ways to do that moving forward.
Yep. So, David, is your use of Veza really the sole case of cleaning up a long history of bad process?
Yes and no. So Veza is our check mechanism for everything. So it's the front end side of that, which is what I was going to say, and kind of this is one part of the inherent problem, is a lack of orchestration, of identity orchestration, being able to put a solution together to track and understand. Then it's a matter of actually implementing that, giving the real permissions, right? I mean, how do you get them into those legacy apps? How do you get them into poorly designed apps and those? And then you need something like Veza to say, okay, did you do it right? Are you managing it correctly? Because day by day, things are changing. And so you put that as one app and it's pretty straightforward. 10 apps becomes difficult. 100 becomes impossible. 500 becomes astronomical. And so you get into a scenario where you're trying to manage this at a 500 app scenario. You can't orchestrate one, but you think you're going to not have over provisioning throughout your environment. I mean, it's a moot point. So you need these tools to be able to accomplish that, especially at scale.
That's a really good point. Has your process changed? Let me ask you. So you said yes and no to the answer about process, saying like, we put this tool because it's to clean up some old process. But the fact now that you're using the tool, does your process change as a result of it, or you're still fighting the same battle? What do you say, David?
No, I the process does change because what happens is and it nothing happens overnight. There's no magic
Right.
bullets, but you begin to
But gradually
close
tell
the
me what's
holes.
happened. Yeah.
Right. You're closing the holes, you're closing the risk, you're closing those problem sets. So you might start with your most critical applications and you work those over provisioning and misprovisioning problems out of your criticals. And then you pick your next set, and your next set, and your next set. So it might take you 2 years to get there, but at the end of 2 years, your risk posture has dramatically improved because now you have good process to orchestrate, administrate, and validate all of that access across 30 to 40% of your application base. And by the time you get to 100%, 30% of your applications have changed. So it's just this vicious cycle that you're going to have to continually do anyway.
It's exhausting.
Yep.
Tarek,
I mean,
what do you say?
I compare it to, again, like it's a cleanup effort, right? You know, if you were to imagine you walk into a room and there's a big old mess in that room, there's, big items that you can easily get rid of, right? It takes two people potentially to kind of get those out. And they put a big dent in the environment. Like that's a big chunk of the mess. But as you get into the nooks and crannies, into the smaller things, it involves having more of a delegated approach, right? Where you need a team. You handle this side of the room, I handle this side of the room, and you get into the fine nooks and crannies in it. And the process that we start seeing is moving forward with like what we would call micro certifications, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as things are shifting, as entitlements are changing in real time, don't wait until it's the end of the quarter to go back and retroactively certify, right? These things have to be happening on an ongoing basis, right? I mean, for something to stay in good standing and for it to remain clean, you kind of have to do this. It becomes more of a hygiene. So by wrapping a certification process around these micro changes that happen in the environment and saying like, hey, this is your slice of cloud. You own these 5 things. That's it. That's all I care about. That's all you should be caring about for your slice of cloud. It becomes more of a shared effort, right? And makes it more scalable versus having to do this in bulk later on. So it all rolls up at the end. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dwayne Grant has a question that sort of tags on to what I was saying earlier. How much of a chicken or the egg problem do we have here? I mean that you need a culture supportive of managed access, but you also need tooling to do it. I mean, my feeling is no matter what, you're always going to need tooling. Do you have to solve one before you can do the other? I mean, kind of what your answer was, David, is like it's an ongoing struggle.
Well, yeah, but to that point, I mean, it's not necessarily a chicken and an egg problem because anytime you try to tool or automate a bad process, you get a really fast bad process. So you need to redesign and understand how you're going to architect it so it's efficient and effective before you tool it. And then you can tool and then you improve tooling over time. So even without the tooling to start, taking a step builds a better posture, builds a security infrastructure, makes an improvement. And you quickly realize that the tooling becomes part of a supportive process of your of your overall administrative process on how to deal with permission management, how to deal with identity management, right? Decentralized, centralized, we can argue all day long. That's a cultural aspect of a company. But if you have good practice around it and good standards, even in a decentralized process, everybody's rowing in the same direction. If you just allow chaos, which is what we're talking about, and everybody's pulling in different directions, you don't move.
Good point. All right. Before we go on any further, we do have our first game, or kind of our first game that we're all going to play together. All right. It is the public interest.
Do you know what others are thinking? On the public interest.
All right, here we go. As I've said, play along the audience as well. Remember, I'm always impressed if you can do 4 for 4 because it is not easy to get 4 for 4 in this game. Here we go. Most average monthly search queries, which gets more, mistake or error? What do you think, David, Tarek?
Ooh, I'm going to go with A, mistake.
I'm going to go with the error.
All right. One of you will be on their road for 4 for 4 and the other will not. Who will it be? It's going to be Tarek. All right. Tarek, you're 1 for 1 now.
All right.
All right, here we go. You know, here's why I think error probably appears more is people probably type in error message and they want to know what that error message is. That's my guess of why that one's so popular.
Probably.
Yeah. All right, next one. Permission or authorization?
Permission.
I would say permission as well.
All right, let's see what we got. You are both correct. All right, good. Tarek is currently 2 for 2. All right. Here we go. Breach or exposure? Remember now, I can't stress this enough. This is all searches, not just people in security searching.
Yeah. Exposure.
I'm going to say breach just because that's the more common word that you hear on the news.
Oh, good point. Good point. Oh! Tarek loses his streak. All right. But it's 2 for 2 still. It's 2-2, right?
Yes.
All right. This is the last one. Super user sudo off of Linux.
Oh.
Well, all us old guys know sudo, but I'm going to go with super user.
Super user.
Super user. It is sudo, just edging it out.
What?
I would not have believed
Well,
that.
the two of you tied.
What the heck? All right.
Sudo, really?
Really? Yeah,
I would not
that
have
shocked
known
me
that
too.
one.
It's possible people type super user as 2 words. That's the other thing. This was super user as 1 word. So it's possible if we included both of them, I'm sure it would have surpassed sudo.
I would have
as
thought
well.
exposure for sure.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
exposure to the elements, right?
No, but you know what?
To sun.
right. But David makes a good point is that it's always in the news as a breach. Like you don't see exposure in the news as well as in the news as much as that.
Well, that's because that's not the fun headline, right?
No, it is not.
Well, I figured
do we have the
reason
poll
why-
up?
The reason
Yeah.
why I thought it was exposure is because of, again, like climate change and things like that.
Well, that's a good
understand,
point
like,
too. Yeah, you're
what-
right. I didn't think
what's
about
my
that.
exposure to bad air quality, right? Like this is like for sure would be exposure.
All right, we have an amazing poll of a lot of bad ideas here, people. It just went up. I want all of you to get in there and vote. Please get in, vote. Let us know which idea is the worst. I know the Duchess submitted a lot of bad ideas.
Does Taylor Swift really have a song named Pseudo? John Prokop said that.
Really?
Yeah,
I
that's
heard
true.
that.
Then that's why we got it.
Maybe she was a Linux administrator at one point. Do you think?
Maybe.
I don't know. Let's see. We got some questions that came in from the audience. Let's see what we got here. I'll ask both of you this. In your experience, we're not actually talking about your application. We're talking about the culture here. In your experience, how difficult has it been to address the cultural issues around addressing excessive permissions? Because I know there's got to be scenes of like, fine, I'll just give you access to everything. Like, I don't want to think about it. Like, I'm sure that comes up all the time. How do you deal with that, and how difficult and frustrating is it? Let's start with you, Tarek.
I mean, it's really it really just depends on, the context of when somebody's asking for additional permissions, right? If it's something that's associated with an actual project or something that is tied to revenue. And again, I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly here, David. Maybe you can ask it to me again, or a different question, or a different way.
Well, the issue of, like, for example, let me create a scenario for you, David.
Okay.
I'll start with you, David. Is, hey, can I get access to this whole thing? And you realize, and I'm just sort of asking it because I want it, but maybe I don't necessarily need it. But then it maybe becomes a political thing of, hey, you're wielding power over me, and I don't want you to wield power over me. And even though I don't need it right now, it'd be nice to have later. I mean, does this, I got to assume this happens, David, yes?
It does. And luckily, we've been able to establish that culture over a long period of time. I mean, it's not something that we did overnight. So being able to orchestrate that and build it into a system of request approval, delivery has helped that process. I mean, we had to actually build a custom system to do that. But by putting in that kind of orchestration on the front end, it allows you to not, in a sense, not be that traffic cop, because you're not asking me for the permission to start with. You're asking your direct boss, who has to say yes first. And then it goes to the application owner, who has to say yes, and then it comes to my security and access identity team before we say yes. So you have 3 people that have to say yes to that. So you kind of get to shift some of that blame back to the boss, back to the supervisor, because if they go, hey, I really would just like to have this, their boss is like, you don't need it for your job, and they've been empowered to say no. So by doing that, it's not the security team, it's not the access team taking on that. They have to justify it up front. And if they pass their boss and they pass the app owner, 99% of the time, we're not going to step in and say no unless there's some regulatory requirement or some compliance issue because of that grant. And so it makes a good culture of, I know that when I'm making that request, it's legitimate and the people are listening because I really do need it, as opposed to it's just a random. So if you can build that kind of culture in, it works really well. If it's, oh, I emailed the access team because I really feel like that's fun and that's my process, then all the blame goes to them when they say no. And then there's this contention between the user who wants the access and the team that delivers it.
I think I'm ready.
Great answer, by the way.
I'm ready. I'm ready to offer my feedback on that one as well. I mean, it's I've been on the vendor side for quite a bit of time in my career, so I haven't really kind of been deep into the day-to-day of these types of scenarios. But I agree. I mean, for the most part, as a human being living in an organized society, if there's a process that's been defined, then I'm likely to kind of adhere to that process. If there's no process, that means it's up to interpretation. So I think it's really important, at least for critical areas around, requesting access for critical systems, applications, data. Those have to be well defined, or else you're kind of like leaving yourself open to interpretation. It's just up to the app owner to make a decision. And everybody, there is pressure that gets into this mix, right? Because everybody wants to inherently be collaborative and cooperative, and it's part of being in an innovative environment. So the natural response is, maybe I'll give you access, right? Because, there's nothing predefined for this. So the default is to give you access. But yeah, the challenge is, you have to have these things predefined and locked down as much as possible, or else you're rolling the dice on that one.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
By the way, I saw one of the bad ideas was ask the attackers to provide the permissions they want a user to have. Now that is some great bad advice. Well, things would be so.
And then auto approve it, right?
Auto approve it. Even better. But hold it. Let me ask you just a quick question per the story you were just saying, David. You were saying there's like 3 levels to give permissions. What if there's a scenario like I need access to this to do something today, right now, at this moment? Doesn't that approval process sort of stand in my way to do my job?
Well, sort of, but we've orchestrated that well. We've automated that well. And today's level of communication of email, Slack, Teams,
Usually
WhatsApp,
something
chat,
like that
phone, right? I mean, it's how you build it. So as long as you've orchestrated that communication, that a person doesn't have to be sitting at their desk, typing in on the keyboard of their computer with 2-factor authentication at the moment they make the approval, and you're doing an iris check, right? You're pretty much opening it up to say, oh, this has gone through, and I'm giving them the details on their phone and they can just click approve. You build the process to be supportive of it. It's somebody said that they had a process where you needed a sitting member of Congress, a retired member of Congress, an astronaut, and the Secretary of State. That's probably going to take a month to get you the approval, but that's designing in slow, right?
And you need to know an astronaut too, which I don't.
Well, yeah, and you have to define what one really is these days with SpaceX and all. I mean, they're common people that are now astronauts. I mean,
for those,
William Shatner is now a real astronaut. Come on.
He is. Well, I am a pseudo astronaut too. Hold it. I think our audience knows I have one acting gig where I was in the Discovery Channel's dramatization of the Apollo 13 mission, and I played not an astronaut, but the scientist Cy Liebergott, who helped the science come back. And actually, I will find that video. I think we've passed it around to it. But it's like 45 seconds of me appearing in this show, giving sort of advice to the astronauts, if you will. I'll give you approval. I'm happy to do it, even
That's
though
what I
I'm
mean.
not an
But
astronaut.
if you design your process to be responsive, to provide in modern communication, somebody could be on the road in their car, at the airport, whatever, and still review it, have all the information they need to provide approvals rapidly. It really shouldn't get in the way.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I got a question I want to ask, and this was something you and I, Tarek, talked about earlier. Can we just accept the fact, and are we allowed to, that misconfigurations are going to happen? Is that is that an accepted fact? And is it part of this just controlling too much access? And how is this and the controlling the blast radius sort of connected, I guess? Because then are we talking about microsegmentation, which is a whole other topic altogether? Like, are misconfigurations inevitable? Let me just ask you that, Tarek.
They are inevitable, right? The idea is to understand what your blast radius is at any given moment, right? And to be able to easily be able to go back and look at what a compromised identity had access to across the board. Because the last thing you want to do is, conduct an audit in order to find out what the true extent of it after the fact, right? You want, when something does happen, you want to quickly go and understand what that is. Misconfigurations are going to happen. It's just the nature of the environment that, based on going back to what David was saying, if you're faced with, if IT or security is the bottleneck to something an initiative that's tied to revenue, somebody's going to find a way to circumvent and push something forward and make the change and possibly log it and audit it. But sometimes these things don't happen, right? So misconfigurations are just the nature of are a fact of how things happen today because of speed, because of lack of resources, right? Everybody's trying to do more with less, so you can't possibly be very detailed on every single level, at least in a manual way, right? So that's why misconfigurations are going to happen.
All right. Were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think you can totally eliminate misconfiguration. I think you can mitigate a good portion of it by good process, good solutions. You're never going to get 100% because somebody's going to come around for the exact reasons Tarek just said. Is you've got to deliver by tomorrow. They don't ask. They just push it through, right? There was a comment previously in the chain, I don't remember where, talking about shadow IT. And I've always believed that shadow IT occurs because that's when your IT team can't deliver on the requests of the business, right? That's why they go around you. In the same breath here, if they don't feel like you've got a good process, you're not supportive of a business solution to produce a result for the company, then they're going to find a way around you, which is going to lead to misconfiguration and miscommunication. So if you've got a really good process, you can mitigate it, but there's still going to come a point where something's got to go faster than you can respond. Something's going to do more than you're capable of handling at the moment. You're not going to have the resources, and it will happen. So you can't get rid of all of it, but you can mitigate most of it.
Very good point. All right. Please get your questions in. If you have not, click the link at the bottom of the screen to register for hacking conferences, which is going to be a super fun topic. Please click that link now. Please do it. We are going to be playing our Department of Yes game very soon. And please vote for your favorite bad ideas if you have not done that as well. All right, let's get to the discussion of audits. I'll start with you, Tarek. How is the process of managing audits with all this? And I'm assuming part of this is figuring out who has access to PII. And I'm assuming Veza can give us this kind of information. Yes? No?
Absolutely.
So walk me through the process here.
Yep. the idea is to first, again, get full visibility of users and what they have access to from in terms of data sources, right? SQL tables, Snowflake tables, anything where there's crown jewels effectively. And Veza can do that effectively really, really well, right? The idea then is to place audit controls. So a lot of the controls that David was talking about are not just like monitoring controls where, when something shifts, automatically go and alert, right? Let me know. Those are more tactical day to day, and we can obviously help with that. But the ability, because you have to go back and prove from an audit and compliance that you actually have all the actual controls in place. And that's where Veza truly shines, right? To be able to go and do this at a very, very granular level, because we're not certifying only identities. We're allowing data owners to go and certify on data sources as well. And then we reconcile in the middle, right? So identity owners certify their identities, and the data owners say, yes, this access is legitimate. And then there's the handshake that happens in the middle. And then you have true reconciliation between, the person that's provisioning access and the team or owner of the data that's on the receiving end of that access. So it has to be a very kind of, elaborate type of certification process, and it has to be scalable. And that's why I keep coming back to the term micro certifications and continuous compliance, because to think that you're going to do this once a quarter and have it be done effectively, you're probably going to miss a lot of things that evolved over that. We're talking about a 90-day window, right? Anything could happen in these 90 days. If you're only doing this once a quarter, that's your risk at that point, is you're actually potentially leaving a bad configuration out there for an entire 90 days, right? And you want to shrink that down as much as possible. And the idea is to do this on a more ongoing basis. And the only way to do that, and Veza helps with that, is to convert those into small slices of certifications that can be delegated and can be managed on a more frequent basis.
Okay. All right. What I was going to say is, where we had, let me ask. Oh, we have a new question that came in. I want to see what this is. All right. Let me see if you want to challenge this one. How is Veza better than Azure Risky Sign-In Solution? From Vivek Shukla. You want to take this one?
Yep.
Go for it, Tarek.
So again, when you're assessing things just purely from an identity approach, you're not getting the full picture, right? To be able to truly understand what the risk is in relationship to data, you have to tie both identity and you have to tie data back to identity, right? And you also have to make it more consumable, right? So instead of leveraging, or you can't speak the language of raw permissions. Every single platform does authorization differently, right? So the reason why Veza is able to scale is because it's translating it to a common model based on CRUD. Can user A, can Tarek do data delete on these 5 SQL tables, right? Yes or no? And that's absolutely critical. And that's the question that most organizations can answer. And the organizations that try to answer that question, when we actually go and work with those, they're attempting to do this in spreadsheets, right? I mean, anybody who really cares about locking this down, they ultimately are trying to do this in spreadsheets, because the existing platforms, the existing systems they have in place today, all the investments they have in place today around identity are not fitting the bill to do this, right?
And one thing I would add to that, and I really do, the thing that I would add to that is we all, in a lot of ways, bought into this idea of RBAC, role-based access control, and this pipe dream of what RBAC could do by identifying roles and saying, oh, we don't have to worry about the user because we can identify the role and grant the role permission so that we can control this. And the complexity of that problem, it's an almost impossible problem to actually implement. And Veza provides a pathway and a methodology that really allows you to see it in such a way to do it. And not to throw anything, I was going to say on your last comment, one of the things that we've talked about with Vesa is actually tying into data identification platforms for unstructured data, so that you have data classification going in that this is confidential, this is private information, and then being able to tie that right in and say, that's a file, that's a Word document that I've classified confidential, who can get access to it, and tie all the way down to that in an automated fashion, which is unheard of today, but we're so close to being able to make that happen.
All right, I think it's time for our next game. And hold it, come on. What's happening here with my... Why am I...
Do another game.
Hold on. Oh, I do have the game. There we go. There we go. The phone call just came in.
Hello, welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
All right, so we have a lot of terrible ideas here. All right, and the way this works is you have to tell me why you want to implement these incredibly stupid ideas. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Taberski, and both of you are going to answer this, and I'm going to see how well you do. Again, you can't be facetious. I want a legitimate reason why you want to do this. And this comes in from, I forget who this is. They use the name Romue, R-H-O-M-U-E. But Romue suggests, let users review their access rights themselves. Why do you want to do this, David Taberski?
Well, I mean, the users themselves would have the best understanding of their job responsibility for the business. So then they would be able to articulate the needs that they have to be supportive in, revenue and business growth. So by allowing them to review their own access and decide what they really need, the business should move forward faster.
I'm going to give that to you. Yeah. All right, Tarek, why do you want to do this?
The reason why I would want to do this is because it actually makes the approval process a lot quicker, potentially, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Instead of having to wait multiple, right? So
think about the 3 levels of permissions that David has.
Yep.
Yeah, that's like way too complex.
All right. All right. I'm giving it to you. All right, here's the second one. There's a lot of good bad ideas in here, and I'm debating which one to take. There is one that's voted up, but I'm going to. Well, let me see. Well, we're going to go with this one. This was the one that involves the astronaut here, and this comes from Brian Colt. Formulate strict access request processes. So this is going in the opposite direction. Require the user's manager, the CFO, CIO, an intern, one sitting member of Congress, a retired member of Congress, an astronaut, and Secretary of State sign off on all requests. Now, there's some good and bad on this one. I'm going to start with you, Tarek. Why do you want to do this?
That's one way to guarantee that nobody gets access.
Yeah, that's true. That's real right there. I mean, you don't have access problems because no one's got access. It's what it is. David?
Well, I mean, you have at least a large number of reviewers in this, so that you're ensuring that the user gets what they really need. By having this 7-8 chain, long string, you have a good opportunity to really evaluate it over time. I'm not sure how much of the retired member of Congress might understand the app, but we don't judge on quality. We're only judging quantity here. So,
Very, very good. I like it. Oh yeah! All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your great tips here, and thank you to our audience for all your spectacular bad ideas. We will pick the absolute winner, who will be the winner, and we'll find that out. Actually, we won't say until the Tuesday of so it'll be whatever the 15th. It'll be the 15th of August is when we'll find out the winner of this as well. This bad idea. All right, where are we? At 45. We're at 45 minutes, so we have to. What do you got to do now? Here. Oh, we should put up the 10% poll. Yes, Aaron has put the 10% poll up better. And wow, kudos to our audience. Lots of good 10% tolls, and I'm going to go with one that's already being voted up, educate users to know that they are overfed access, offer incentives to go on a diet. Ooh, that's good. David, have you ever done that? Have you give people incentives to see what their own permission situation is and to take themselves off of things? Have you ever done that? This is an interesting tactic.
No, I can't say that I've done that, but I like the idea.
I like the idea too.
I like that idea of of at least giving them the opportunity to self-police, to say, hey, look, I really don't ever use that. I don't need that. I mean, we look at that in certain scenarios of if we've granted a permission and it's never been used in the last 90 days, we'll take it away and stuff like that. But I like the idea of turning that around to the user and saying, you basically can come to me and say, I don't need that because I never use it. That's not something I do for my job. And, giving them a little incentive and bonus to do that. I like the idea.
I like
Jeff
it.
Reich did that as well. What do you think, Tarek? You like it?
I absolutely like it. I mean, this is a way, especially for these larger, these users that have a lot of access. It would be good to give them a chance to justify, like, tell me why you need this, right? And at least like build a process around that as well. If you can, if you can do it so that you give them the opportunity to defend why they have a specific type of access, maybe it's legitimate access. I like it.
And by the way, tied to this, David Alkema suggests make it easy for users to deprovision themselves when they no longer need access as well. On top of it, it's, by the way, how difficult is it for people to deprovision themselves? Is it too difficult?
When today's world, there's certain it depends. It's because if you're integrated in a SIM process, it's fine. If it's all manual, it's not. So you can't really answer that question without going into several details.
Yeah. So the answer, sadly, the answer is probably yes. It is too complicated because the fact that you can't answer it because everything's. I totally get it. But hold it, on a global scale. Like if I need to deprovision an entire department, how difficult is that for you to do, David?
Deauthorize is easy. Deprovision again depends because we have.
Hold on, let's just so we're talking the same thing. What do we mean by deprovision versus deauthorize?
Well, deprovision means to take them out of the application, means to shut down their accounts and close off that access, as opposed to I go and disable their account so they can't log into it. Right. Yeah. So the deauthorization step is fairly straightforward and easy. The deprovisioning step can be pretty complex depending on all the applications the department holds, the numerous variations of that, the roles that they hold, and the permissions underlying it. So without a good tool set like Veza, it's almost impossible to know everybody and where they are. So Veza actually exposes that and makes that job easier, but it's still a difficult process.
Vivek Shukla has a lot of very specific questions here about Veza. Could you give, and this obviously for you, Tarek, an example use case of how Veza integrates with a PAM solution, and what problem does it solve in a PAM deployment? PAM standing for Privileged Access Management.
Yep. If we
Not
look
the
at
no stick spray.
Yeah. If we look at PAM as a platform where you can go and effectively wear different hats, right? You're assuming different roles to become privileged, elevate your privileges into downstream applications. The idea is to incorporate that into Veza and to really understand, well, what are the potential things that this user can actually request? And is that access that is readily available for them, meaning they can become that privileged person at any point, or do they actually need to go and assess or request access before they actually can assume that role or that privileged type of authority, right? With Veza, again, like helps you understand what are the possible roles or hats that person can wear through that PAM solution for downstream applications, right? And do they effectively become a different identity on the downstream applications that are being controlled through PAM, or is it the same actual identity, right? So getting that level of visibility and wrapping better controls around it on audit for audit compliance and certification is absolutely critical, and we can help with that.
And I can give an example
Sure.
it's a very specific example of how we're actually beginning to use Vesa in this somewhat way. It's not a strict PAM scenario, but our security best practice is separate your privilege from non-privileged account. You might have a person that has 1, 2, or 3 accounts. Certain privileges granted to certain, but their standard daily operating account is separated that doesn't hold that privilege, which in a sense is a PAM scenario. Using Vesa, we can tie that together by identity, so we can see that a single individual has these privileges very readily. We're also tying that into our HR platform, so when somebody goes on vacation, we can deauthorize privileged accounts during their vacation time. So by being able to tie from the original user to those privileges, we can now tie their vacation requests to the elevated privileged accounts and disable them for the times that they're not in the organization.
By the way, Jim McLeod makes a comment here that runs alongside this. With permission to commissioning, I'd worry about a churn on a system where a typical user does log in every 3 months, but obviously you could just set it for whatever. Example, MBO, performance review. Will they have to get reprovisioned every time? I'm assuming you could just change it by app, like a performance review. Sometimes you don't log in until once a year, right, Tarek?
No, I mean, you define, that's very much definable within Vesa. I mean, risk is how you want to assess it. Is risk, is it an active user, somebody who's not logged in for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? That's different within each and every environment, right? Mm-hmm. So Vesa can do it so that, if the user has not been actively, logging in and authenticating, whether through their identity provider or in some of the downstream target systems, then this user does not need to have access to these resources, right? Or if they go on leave, then they do not have they should not readily have access to privileged type of roles on these target systems. So we absolutely help by keeping track, both from a timestamp perspective, and also now we're doing more around logging. So we're actually looking at the logs actively to see what these users are utilizing on these platforms, like Snowflake, for example, so that we revoke or help you make better decisions on where you need to, remove or deallocate a type of, databases, roles, anything that's associated with that user based on their utilization.
All right. I'm going to do a quick wrap-up thing and then come back with some final thoughts from everybody. And I do have an extra question if we have time for it. But let me remind everybody, the button at the bottom of the screen, it's going to only stay there for a few more minutes. Please click it right now, because I'm going to make it disappear. Or actually, I won't. Aaron, our producer, will. Click it now to register for the one that's going to happen on August 18th, Hacking Conferences. It'll be on the old new platform of version 2 here. So it'll look a little different here, but it'll have more production capability as well. So go ahead and click on it now. And while we're doing that, I am going to share my screen in just a second to just wrap up and then come back for some final thoughts. And hopefully we'll get another question in here as well. All right, so their next show is August 18th, 2023, Hacking Conferences, an hour of critical thinking about shaking up the old format of in-person events. Go ahead and click on that darn link now if you haven't done that. Remember, as I said, if you register early, you're entered in to raffle to win a CISO Series jacket. So essentially just do it before August 15th. Or how about right now? Okay. Huge thanks to Vesa. Thank you so much for sponsoring this event. We are thrilled to have you on board. You're going to be sponsoring a ton of stuff coming up, and we're thrilled to have you doing that. And thank you so much for sponsoring this Super Cyber Friday event. All right, now starting in about 97 minutes from now at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review. And our guest is TC Nijelkowski, who is the CISO over at Nextdoor. And this we do on the CISO Series YouTube page, so you'll go there and stick around for a meetup. You can change that link right now. There, look at that. I say it and Aaron does it. He's amazing. So that link, if you click on it, you could click on it now and just get yourself set up, because in just about 6 minutes we'll all be over there. That is on Toucan. I'm talking to you. If you've never come to our meetup at the end of the show, please come. It's a lot of fun. We get a chance to meet all these people who've been submitting these horrible ideas. And you can ask them, did that actually happen to you? And they'll say, yes, I did, but don't tell anybody. Also, tell your friends to join us. Now, we don't do it every Friday now, just mostly because of my own travel these days. But we usually do it at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. You can always go to our site, although the 18th one I have to update. But if you go to the events page on our site, we usually keep a schedule of all our virtual and in-person events as well. And if you want to sponsor a Super Cyber Friday, well, just email me at david@CISOseries.com. All right. With that being said, let's get some final thoughts on this. Tarek, what is it you want people to know about VESA that they don't know already and they should know? And about this issue of bad permissions?
Yep. VESA is the only platform that can possibly scale to solve this problem. I mean, what we're seeing in this space right now from other contenders that claim to do the same is they may have the same look and feel in terms of graph, right? But it can't possibly, what we're seeing from our customers is they don't scale to the amount of nodes that we can actually support, first of all. And more importantly, the information that they're getting from these platforms is way too noisy, right? So that's the number one kind of chief complaint. And VESA kind of quiets down that noise by giving you a more kind of consistent model that's based on CRUD. So you can easily get to the actual answers that you want of relationships between identities and data. And, lastly, where we are from a product roadmap perspective, we have very, very aggressive aspirations to become more of a control plane, right? Right now, we're focusing primarily on visibility and we chose that. We could have easily started with actual enforcement, but we wanted to start from visibility because we believe genuinely that you cannot fix something unless you first fully understand the depth and breadth of the problem. And then from there, once you have that, you're in a better position to actually go and enforce. So ultimately, our roadmap is targeted towards becoming more of a control plane, an access decision type of engine. And that's where we're heading in the future, not so distant future.
And if someone wants to learn more about VESA, where would they go? And can they connect with you?
Absolutely. They can go to VESA.com and, reach out to me or reach out to our support channel. And, I'm happy to engage anybody.
And you're available in 3 minutes when we go over to the other platform, to Toucan, yes?
Yes.
Okay. David, last thoughts on this issue with regards to bad permissions. What have you learned over the past few years in dealing with this problem?
Well, I think I've said this a couple times now, so I'm just going to repeat it here.
Sure.
There are two big statements that everybody uses, especially sales guys out there now. One, it's not a matter of if, but when. I know everybody's heard that one.
Yes.
And there's no perimeter anymore, right?
Yes.
And so I got thinking about those a couple of years ago, saying if those are true, then what is really important to a security environment? And I've broken it down to three basic things. One is the protection of the infrastructure, whatever that infrastructure is. It might just be the laptop. It might just be a cell phone. It's whatever the infrastructure is that you're using. You have to protect the infrastructure. Two, you have to protect the data because the data is where the critical value is. And then the third thing is you have to protect your identities. You have to know who's accessing your infrastructure and your systems. So outside of those three things, I haven't come up with a really good fourth definition that fits with those two elements that I started with are true. Those are the three critical things that a security team has to do. And that third one being the protection of identity. You've got to have a good structure. You got to have a good, orchestration. You have to have a good administration and a good audit and control. And VESA plays a part in that. And I give them that. So.
All right. I'm going to ask you for really a 15-second answer to this question. And I know it's not a 15-second answer, but Dustin Sachs asks, how do you actually educate users that they really don't need some of the permissions that they have? Like,
carefully.
You were talking about self-policing. What were you saying, David?
Carefully. It's the way I answer that. Carefully.
Well, that's a good answer. Tarek,
that is not a 15-second answer because to the point, what Tarek said about visibility, you can't teach somebody something they don't understand. They have to have a frame of reference. So to educate them, you have to give them frame of reference. They have to have an understanding, and then you can get to knowledge. And yeah, I can't do that in 15 seconds.
That's right. All right. Well, you want a quick comment? Seriously, 10 seconds. We got to wrap it up, Tarek.
No, I mean, if you're going to take away access from them, just give them the ability to request access in an easier way. So, take something and give something in return.
Good point. All right. Hey, I want to thank my guests, David and Tarek, and we're all going to roll over to the meetup portion over on the Toucan platform. So please, everybody, do me a favor. Just click that damn button at the bottom of the screen. Click it right now. I'm going to click it. You should too. Aaron, take us out.